Welcome back. We're on the last lap of the program this morning on News Hub Extra here on Silverbird News 24. I'd like to thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope that you've been taking away one or two lessons from our conversation with the former imam. But those were pretty instructional lessons. But now we're moving into a different thing entirely. In Nigeria here, you oftentimes read on the pages of newspapers of an adult way into their 40s, sometimes 50s and even 60s, forcing themselves on underage children. Now, when I say underage children, females are not just the victims. Yes, we get to see or hear reports of females in the press, but then even little boys most times are also sexually molested or harassed, as the case may be. I recall a couple of years ago in Kaduna, I was at a general hospital where a mob of people came into the hospital with an underage girl. Now, the interest of most people at the point was to actually lynch the supposed accuser. I mean, people just wanted to lynch the suspect, so to say. But then a critical aspect of that entire process was forgotten. The mother was more interested in washing the clothes, washing the baby, and the girl, washing her clothes and all of that. You know, that I learned on later on was more like destroying what will be evidence in a court if eventually the case was to end up in court. Because right there at the hospital, the mother was begging that the whole thing should be forgotten, you know, swept under the carpet. And I've come to understand that this happens a lot of times. I'll be talking this morning with my guest, Elizabeth Enu Akan. She's not new here. She's a SRHR advocate, that is sexual reproductive health
and rights.
Rights, yes, and rights advocate. Thank you so much for coming through. Today we're looking at sexual assault, a look at an active bystander. You know, but first of all, how bad is the situation when it comes to, I know we get to hear these things, even as reporters, we go to report these stories, but how bad is the situation in Nigeria?
It's really bad. In Nigeria, it's really, really bad. And the fact that we do not have courts that are specific to these kinds of incidents mean that even justice takes a really long time to get, if it is even gotten. You know, you have case, there was a case recently where someone was in court for about 3 to 5 years, thereabout, and then the sentence for the rapist was 3 or 4 years. So what was the point, really, of going through that really long time and then having someone spend 3 or 4? There was a case of someone who had raped children, got 3 or 4 years, came back and raped the children again. So we can see that when it comes to Nigeria, it's as if there is a reward for things like this. So we need reproductive justice courts. So it's not just the regular courts, because I feel like the judges are not trained for these specific. We need those kind of courts, and we need judges that go for trainings on SRHR, you know, sexual and reproductive health rights related issues, so that they can judge those cases with, you know, the training in mind. I think that it would really help us as a country to move forward and to actually help people to get justice.
Asking for those courts, don't you think it's far-reaching? Because at the end of the day, when you sit down and look at various sectors of Nigeria, everybody's requesting for a specialized court. Politicians are, or should I say, electoral advocates seek a different court for electoral offenders. You know, corruption cases also are seeking separate courts for corruption offenders and all of that. Why don't we just focus with what we have at the moment and look at how to improve it and then have it work in this area as well?
Well, because what we have is not good enough by far. You know, so that's the problem. Maybe if there was something they could do, like create a time and create a certain and make it maybe compulsory for judges who have to sit for these cases to undergo some sort of training. You know, if you have to sit for a rape case or a sexual assault or molestation case, you should have undergone some certain kinds of training, because I think that giving somebody a 3-year sentence for raping a child is just not good enough, and then having the case to drag on for 4 years. Some people's cases drags on for like some people were raped as children, and it drags on until they become adults.
Here in Nigeria?
Yes, go to university, like you're coming back for a case. So it becomes another trauma on its own. So first you've been raped, and now they're calling you back year after year. Sometimes police investigation takes a year. Why is it taking a year? Why can't it be shorter? Like, what are the things that we could do to make these things shorter? Because it's a very, very serious problem, and what we are calling justice, for me, is not good enough.
Well, we know of states that have actually implemented, or should I say, signed into law, stiffer penalties when it comes to the issues of rape. I know of Kaduna State, for instance, and then recently Lagos as well. And I'm pretty sure there are other states. But isn't that a good way to start, you know?
Well, are people being given these sentences? It's not just about, having this sentence. Are people being given, these maximum sentences? And sometimes you have, even the law enforcement agencies, they also require training. Sometimes you have them being sympathetic, so to speak, to offenders. These are sexual offenders. These are people who are raping sometimes their own children. So I think that the people that handle...
How do you mean when you say they are sympathetic to sexual offenders?
So there was a time when a girl who was raped by her father for almost a decade, like before she was 8, and continued until she was in her mid-teens. She had to go to another state for a court case and all of that. And they wanted the girl to sit in the car with the father. And then while he was there, they were just, talking, gisting, oh, Aga, how are you? Things like that. That's not good enough. Because this child is seeing what you're doing. And it seems, to anyone looking that, oh, you do not think that what this man has done has enough gravity. So just by that, and then the fact that you want this child who has been beaten and raped by this man over and over and over again to share a car. And they were even suggesting that the social worker, that came with the child should not go with the child. But you want to, do you understand? They're not, sometimes they're not really thinking from the perspective of the survivor, from the perspective of the victims of sexual assault. And another thing, okay, there was something that happened recently. This one is both law enforcement and the law. There was a child that was getting raped and sexually molested, basically, sexually molested by an adult, a female, and the child was also female. And so, you go to report this to the police, and they wanted to arrest the child because of the SSMPA,
SSMPA, can you break that down?
Same-sex Marriage Prohibition Act. So basically banning people who are lesbian, gay, and, so because of that act, they wanted to go and arrest the child who was being molested because...
No, by saying child, are you referring to the fact that this child is underage?
Yes, underage, an underage person, so cannot give consent. But they wanted to go and arrest the child for being sexually molested by a female person when she's female. So these are the issues, actually.
All right. So quickly, before we go into the
active bystanding,
I want to know, when you come across these sexual offenders, what do you make of them? What is their thought pattern? Is it a case of because some people most times on the streets are quick to attribute it to to spiritual things, but perhaps forgetting the fact that maybe this individual too must have suffered the same fate growing up, or perhaps it's just a character trait that perhaps one does not really know how it was picked. But what do you make out of these people when you ever get a chance to evaluate them via communication and all of that?
I'm not sure I want to get that chance.
Okay.
Because I think that you must be someone actually that should not be around people to think that it is okay for you to molest your child sexually over and over, or anybody's child for that matter, like for the fact that you have those urges and for the fact that you think it's okay to indulge them, you need to be locked up for a long time, and then you need psychiatric help throughout the long time that you're locked up.
So you don't feel that sexual offenders are victims as well?
No,
you don't feel they are victims?
I think that they are very deliberately molesting people, especially in Nigeria, because they can. You can't call, okay, the man I talked about that was raping somebody's child, went to prison, came back and raped the child again. That's not a victim. That's humiliation. He's purposely saying, you can't do anything to me, because he knows that probably the parents or the mother of this child are helpless, so to speak. So he knew, because he has done it before and got 3 years. And so he knows that he can do that and get away with it. And so he came back and he did it again just because he can. So I think that they do it just because they can. And you have religious bodies sometimes backing these people, especially if they have a position in church. There was a time, some pastors plural, they came to beg on behalf of somebody who had been raping his child. Why are you coming to beg for a rapist? And saying he's the breadwinner.
Okay, now that you've mentioned that, let's go to the issue of bystanders. Now, at least we all know what, for the sake of our viewer, when it comes to the issue of sexual assault, who is a bystander?
Okay, so a bystander is basically not just for sexual assault, generally for all kinds of abuse and assault.
Yeah.
A bystander is basically somebody who is witnessing this happening or thinks that this is happening. So, yeah.
Okay. So, what role should a bystander play? Because there could be passive bystanders from what you said,
yes,
and there could be active bystanders.
bystanders.
But most of the times when we see an active bystander, they are mostly interested in lynching or mob action and all of that. So what role should bystanders play?
Well, bystanders basically should intervene when they see something wrong happening. I have been helped by active bystanders before. I went for a party. I was working in the party, and so I went to ease myself, and I came out, and this guy was blocking the road. You understand? And then he punched me on the shoulder, and I was like, why are you punching me? Do you understand? I was surprised. So I just gave him time to, sometimes people do things, especially when they are pretending to be drunk, because I feel like a lot of people have been drunk and they didn't punch anybody. Why are you being excessive? And so I waited, so maybe you could realize that, oh, I just punched somebody that was just passing by. And I made to pass again, and then he grabbed me by the arm, left bruises on my arm actually, and dragged me back. And so I dropped my phone, and then I slapped him. I regretted slapping him because my palms are too soft. Should have punched, That's the reason why people need, I think that another focus of funding for non-governmental organizations should be self-defense classes. Yes, not everybody wants to run, and not every situation permits you to
And you feel your punch would have made a difference?
Oh, much better. Probably cut his tongue off or something.
Okay. Okay. That was on the lighter note anyway.
Yeah, so immediately that happened, he wanted to, fight, but I was prepared. But immediately somebody just slid in front of me and said, guy, calm down. I didn't know that people were watching this happen and watch me try to leave twice and being, grabbed. And then he immediately that one person stepped in, another person stepped in, and they were all trying to tell him to calm down. And he started to punch them. Do you understand? So basically, they came in a non-aggressive. This is why, as an active bystander, you also have to know when to intervene. It has to be safe and all of that. So when he started to punch them, more people came. And then when they saw that he wasn't listening to them, They punched him to the ground, got bouncers, took him out.
But do you think that would have been different if the case were reversed? Because sometimes even men who encounter situations like this, maybe they may not be, those situations may not be come in the form where the way women are attacked, but they find themselves in uncomfortable situations. You know, do you think bystanders could intervene, will be quick to intervene in situations like that?
Okay, so give me an example.
No, basically a woman coming onto a man, because those things too happen, you know.
Punching a man or verbal.
Verbal or whichever way. It could also be physical
Yes,
as well.
so in that case, when you see a woman coming at a man brutally, verbally, as an active bystander, what you should do is you say something. Stop that. Stop what you're saying. It's not good enough. Why are you telling him this? That's something that is too bad to say. You don't say that to people. That's also active bystanding. You don't have to come in and boom, boom.
Okay.
You know, so you have to look at what is happening and also look at what kind of reaction. Like in my earlier scenario, the first thing that they tried to do was talk.
Yeah.
You understand? So it was when punches came from the other side, you know. And another thing that we should also know is that it's not every time that you call the police.
Yeah.
A lot of young men in Nigeria, or people, but mostly men, have PTSD from the police force. They have been wrongfully arrested before, just for maybe looking good, for having an iPhone, SARS, you know, all of those things. So not everyone would appreciate you calling the police. So you have to ask first. And also, calling the police is expensive. You know, next thing you know, the person that you call the police for is spending a lot of money paying for fuel and all of that. So sometimes you don't move. That should be like maybe the last course of action. Yes, so we just also have to measure what is happening. So in that case, if it's verbal, you can intervene verbally and say, that's not okay, you know.
But if I may ask, if you're talking about the fact that people shouldn't be quick enough to, hasty to call in the police in situations, does that have to do with the consent of the victim? Because sometimes the victim may want the police involved in a situation like that, but then what if the active bystander or bystanders feel differently about the situation?
So the simple thing you could do is ask, maybe whisper or something, should I call the police? And then the person could nod or could say yes or could say no. So that way, you know, you're sure of what to do.
Okay. So now, lastly, before we go, in prosecuting cases of sexual assault, does the role of the bystander stops at that instant where perhaps, I'm referring now to the active bystander who has intervened in a situation, does his or her role stop there? Or should they also, because sometimes where it becomes a bit tricky and difficult in most cases because witnesses are hard to come by.
Okay.
So how do you get an individual from being a bystander going into becoming a witness in a case of sexual assault?
So what someone could do, if you do not want to be a witness, nobody can force you. But what you could do is that you could document what is happening. So in that way, what you do is that you give the evidence. You understand? So documenting is very important. I don't know if this is okay. Can I add that we have monthly classes for active bystanders, just to train more people. You could be anybody. It could be you. Could be, you know, a woman that sells in the market. It could be anybody. Just training people on how to be active bystanders.
So what do you do? Another aspect I really need to throw in here, because we can't ignore the fact that when these things happen, emotions are high. I recall where I live, there was a certain day I was walking out of the estate, and a young guy was actually rolling in a drainage system. I became a bit concerned, and on investigating, I discovered that he allegedly, it was alleged that he forced himself on an underage girl.
Raped, please use raped.
Okay, raped.
Yes.
Yeah, he raped an underage girl. And then in that instant, I had to tell them that, look, because those who had him in that situation were actually soldiers. And I had to tell them that, look, you guys, people who are looking at this may think differently of it. It's a case of rape. Why don't you hand this guy over to the police and get yourself out of this situation, because if anything happens to him, the narrative will be different. Now, why I'm saying this is because you could come across a mob that is aggressive and would want to take actions right there at that instant. But how can you persuade a mob like that not to react?
I think that you can try, but it's not usually certain in cases of mob like incidents that it will work. But possibly if you have people in the mob that you know, you can gather them first and speak to them, and then they can start speaking to more people, so it diffuses, the situation. But it's really, really hard to stop a mob when you're not somebody that they know and respect a lot. Yes, maybe if you were a well-known figure or the chief of that area and you say stop this for these reasons, they could stop. But if you're just, a random person, it could be very hard, but you can start by
or
talking
perhaps
to
you could just be roped into the situation entirely.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Nigeria, they defend them into be thief.
Yeah.
Why you go they defend? So I think Nigeria is very tricky. But a mob action like lynching people, burning people is not the solution. We have the case of the 3 boys who went to collect money, I think in Port Harcourt.
Yeah, Alu, the Alu 4.
Yeah, Alu 4, and they were burned to death, That's a very terrible incident, because let's imagine if these boys had parents that were that had the power to take action, and they decided to also burn the village. What would they say? Do you understand? So it's very important that we know that we are very careful about what we are doing, even though we are angry, even though we think that what we know is truth or all of. We have to also be very careful. But mob action is very hard to stop, especially if you were not there when it began. So when you see that this thing is beginning to become a mob action, you can try to stop it. But if you came at the end, well, if you know people, you could try. Could try.
Oh well, I mean, sometimes de-escalating. Okay,
but I'll just say that if you think that trying to stop the mob will rope you in, please do not. That's one of the things. Only intervene when it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
So that you also don't get flattened out in the avalanche of whatever is coming.
All right. Well, I wish we could go on and on, but I guess that is all we have for now. We'll just leave it here. Perhaps some other time we'll get to talk more on the issues of sexual assault. I know there are various aspects of it.
I would just like to say that this month is Sexual Assault and Awareness Month, SAM month. So a lot of, if you go online and you type Sexual Assault and Awareness Month, on Instagram and all of that, I think that you would see a lot of programs and a lot of things that can help you, a lot of material and information that can help you understand more about sexual assault, so that you're aware, so that you can know, what sexual assault even is. Because there are many things that is sexual assault, but people do not know that, this is. They just know that it's uncomfortable, but they don't know what it is.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth Enu Akan. Yeah, SRHR advocate. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. All right, well, that is about the size of the program today. I wish we could go on and on, but this is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of News Hub Extra on Silverbird News 24. I hope you had a wonderful time, such as I did, and I hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Don't forget, next week, Grace Ike will be here to lead you through the program. Until then, stay blessed, have a wonderful weekend, and once again, Barka de Salah.